Hi, everyone. So this session was not a live session, but this will be our episode number 4. It's just Tanya and I talking generally about why we started this series, nôtokwêw, pônkiyokêwin, which is centering Indigenous perspectives and experiences with menopause. The reason why we're doing this is varied, but and we'll get into that. And then we also wanted to just cover some of the episodes or ideas for episodes that we have coming up. We're sort of free forming this. We don't really have any set plan. This is just something that Tanya and I are doing together. Just because we want to. It's not sponsored or it's not produced by anyone. We just decided that this is what we wanted to do because our conversations around menopause were getting pretty interesting, and the things that we were finding out were sort of shocking us. So, what do you want to say, Tan?
Yeah, and the things that we're also wondering about, right? Like thinking of our own experiences as we're going through it, and then trying to find information about what is out there from an Indigenous perspective or an Indigenous experience. So, say, for example, me as a Cree woman, what was our learnings or teachings or traditions around menopause? How do you even say menopause in Cree? And what does that mean? And why did they call it that? All of these questions that started to come up because I was really struggling with it physically, mentally, and emotionally, and I'd say probably spiritually too. So I thought there has to be something out there, and this was part of the conversations Christy and I started to have, and thinking about, well, how do we find out this information? And that, I think, sort of led to this. Well, let's talk to so and so. Yeah, and how about so and so? Yeah, and so it just keeps going on, and then suddenly something new comes up, like, oh, we never even thought about that. Let's see if we can get someone to come and talk about that, because we thought, if we're wondering, and we know a lot of other Indigenous women and women in general, or people who menstruate, were wondering about these things, then maybe we could just put together some conversations on Zoom and see what we can pull together as a resource for anyone else who has these questions, and maybe help you find your way through the experience as well.
Yeah, as part of when we started doing this, we started looking into, well, what's been written, what kind of research has been done about Indigenous people and menopause, and it's very scant. There's not much out there. There have been some reports published, some research done, but most of them end with the conclusion that more research needs to be done, or that there wasn't enough data to be able to draw a conclusion. Most of the reports center on sort of some of the knowledges around menstruation, women, bodies, and things that we might already sort of know about or have understanding of. But about menopause specifically, um, it was. It seems to be that in what I've read, it says that there was a lot of people don't really talk about it in the communities, and that's what we heard from our first two guests in our first two episodes. So it seems to be pretty common that through reasons that we all know about, menopause is not a subject that's discussed. But when it comes to specifics on data and research, it seems that there isn't much out there. For example, I was listening to the audiobook Menopause Boot Camp, and one of the statistics that struck me was they said that trans people, two-spirit people, queer people, historically, in this book was written from in the United States, and so this is a statistic that they drew on. Um, that in the general population, that trans people and two-spirit people or LGBTQIA people are not accessing healthcare or access healthcare less, 8% less than the average population. And so my mind was, when it comes to menopause healthcare. So my mind went to, well, within our communities, we have issues that are around access to healthcare, health racism within the healthcare industry, that we know about. And we have, so these issues impact and compact and make it more likely that if a study were to be done, our numbers would be a lot more than 8%, over and above the average population of Indigenous people that have these issues as well for LGBTQIA folks. So I'm just, I think that one of our episodes that we want to do is specifically on trans people and two-spirit people and what their experiences are around menopause.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we talk about is how can we have these discussions that are as inclusive as possible. So we're not only talking from like my perspective as a Cree centered person or as someone who, uh, gave birth as a mother. We want to incorporate um, as many perspectives as we can. So we want to also talk about menopause from the perspective of someone who hasn't given birth or who hasn't been pregnant, and how does that impact them, physically, emotionally, all of the same areas. Because I think that it's really important that we try to include as many perspectives and voices as we can to help those conversations get going. And in the discussion we had when we had the community kind of conversation, on the third episode with Jen Podemski, one of the people shared about how the environment that they live in is impacting their menopause experience. And so that was something for me that I hadn't thought about because that's not part of my experience. So I think it's really good, when we do hear from people about their experiences, because it helps us inform our conversations that we want to have. And not only talking about our experiences, but also what can we do in our communities? What do we have access to sort of start creating or building or identifying our own resources on how we can, in our different areas, respond to menopause, and how can we try to make it easier for ourselves so it's not such a struggle.
I think too that that's such a good point because within our communities, we don't just rely on you know, Western medicine, the healthcare system to provide our healthcare. We have our traditional people, we've got ceremonies we go to, or we help to do things for we self-care, going to the land for some people might be something that works, taking traditional medicines might be another thing, or doing what we can to exercise and stay well, whatever it is that we do for our own self-care. We often see people taking their own healthcare into their own hands, and I think that for me, that's what this series is helping me to understand, is that I am empowered to do that for myself. It doesn't just involve advocating for ourselves within the healthcare system, although that is important, is to know how to do that. It's really difficult sometimes to, um, especially if a doctor or a nurse is dismissive of menopause as being something that needs to be discussed, which we've heard from people, or if they just simply don't acknowledge it in with some of the symptoms that people are experiencing to help explain why they're experiencing that. And I wanted to say, like, some of the things we're discussing and between us when we, pick up the phone and say, well, this, we're just discovering like these things are happening. For example, like 3 years ago, I'm 56. I've been in menopause now for 5 years, fully in menopause. I was in perimenopause for many years, but didn't realize it. My actual, I used to think beforehand with the word menopause that it just simply meant you experience hot flashes for about a year and then it's all done. Carry on, life goes on exactly the same as it was before. And I didn't really understand how, like, the decreasing levels of estrogen, the hormones are really starting to compound into symptoms the further I get away from the time that I first knew that I was in menopause. So when I was 51, 52, 53, it didn't really feel like that much. And now that I'm getting further away, I guess the estrogen levels are dropping and I'm experiencing symptoms that are even worse. But when I was around 53 or so, I started getting really stiff muscles and in not muscle stiffness, but like stiffness to the point where like if I were to hold a pen, after about a couple minutes it would really hurt. And I couldn't hold the pen. And as a painter, I'm trying to stand up against a wall to do my painting and my back would hurt. Then I would sit down and other things would hurt. And if I sit down for too long, like in a ceremony, I can't sit down on the ground for that long of a time anymore. Like 5 minutes, if I'm on the ground in the same position, somebody has to help me up. And that really started to scare me. I was thinking, wow, if this is the way, if this is the trajectory that I'm on, then mobility in the future is going to be an issue. And then I thought, well, not only what can I do about that, but why is this happening? And is this just a part of old age sort of thing? Until we started talking about this, I started reading about it. And accidentally, I found out that that by cutting out sugar and gluten out of my diet. Now, I'm not prescribing this for anybody. People are going to do what's good for their bodies. But for me, um, completely cutting out sugar and cutting out gluten because I wanted to just eat better. Um, all of a sudden, within about 2 or 3 weeks, I wasn't stiff anymore. I could stand up, I could sit down, and I felt way back to normal. And I thought, wow, this is really connected to the inflammation, I guess, in my system. I mean, these are all things that I'm just learning about, and I kind of feel a little resentful that no healthcare professional in all my life has ever sort of said, "Hey, heads up, if you there's a whole list of things like Jen Podemsky discussed having these weird smells. Somebody else on our show, on our last episode, said that they were experiencing like sort of random headaches. Some people said random mood swings, like just feeling anger for a minute, like, and not knowing where that anger came from. So all of the hormones dropping in our bodies can affect you in so many ways, mentally, emotionally, and then understanding too about ceremony and spirituality and making room. Somebody described it as that, and that's how I feel. I feel like I've been putting myself out for so long, um, and now I feel sort of like the energy is drawing back in, like I'm getting quieter, I'm getting um, more reflective, more like it feels like a change, feels like I've come to a crossroads and I'm going to be making another change. And this change is going to lead me into a different understanding of life, a different way of being in the world.
Yeah, I think that that was similar to some of the thoughts that I was having in the beginning. And I was really happy to hear other people are thinking the same and wondering the same. And that is about what happens for this stage in our life when we get into menopause. We have um, a lot of good knowledge and ways coming back around coming of age ceremonies for first menstrual cycle. We have a lot of knowledge and ways coming back about midwifery and childbearing and how to take care of yourself and the ceremonies around that. But what is there for this stage in our life? And um, I'm 52, and I think I've been in perimenopause for at least 4 years. I'm not quite into menopause yet. And so it's already been quite a life change, like a huge life change. I've had children, so I've dealt with the pregnancies and the postpartum and those kinds of struggles. And without a doubt, this is far more difficult um, than dealing with menstruation and childbirth and postpartum. But I think that one of the things that is seemingly starting to emerge, or I don't know if it's emerging quite yet, but is um, along the lines of what you mentioned in our conversation with Jen, is that it's more of our own ceremony, like going through this period is the ceremony in and of itself. And so that really resonates with me. because as Christy mentioned, and my mom, she was one of the guests on our first show. She also talked a little bit about this, was when you take this time and you just want to be isolated, but not isolated in a bad way. Like you're just sort of pulling yourself back and trying to figure out, and you want to discover who you are now at this point in your life. If you raise children, they're probably grown up and gone now. And even if you didn't raise children, you're at a point in your life where you're like, wow, half my life is behind me now. And this is my last chance to do what I really wanted to do. And then you ask yourself, well, what did I really want to do? It kind of could be an identity crisis. And that could be really hard to go through, because you're suddenly wondering, what is my purpose in life now? Whatever was my purpose, all these big questions come to mind. So the changes aren't just physical, but certainly the physical changes can really compound the mental things that you're going through, or emotional things. So I think that through these conversations and guests that we have, the hope is to help people through that, and to know that we're not alone going through this, because sometimes it does feel isolating and not in the good way. So part of it for me too is also creating that community and that space to be able to talk about these things. So that's one of the conversations that I'm looking forward to having. I think for that one, we're going to have Lana Whiskey Jack come on and talk about community organizing for women, and how can you do that in your community as a way to help you through menopause and whatever other issues you might be having. So that's one of the things that I'm really looking forward to.
Those are all good points. I was thinking as you were talking too about, I think I had mentioned this about within a book that I read by Dr. Jen Gunter called the Menopause Manifesto. It's not Indigenous specific for sure, but in the opening chapters, she mentioned something on one of the pages that really stuck with me, which is that she was asking what would be the physical reasons why in our species, the human species, why we would experience menopause and not be able to bear children later on in our lives. So in other species, like in whales, you mentioned the whales, the killer whales, the other in our last one. And so we're not the only mammals who experience menopause, but in our species, we have menopause and then we live a long time potentially after that. And so what would be the reasons for that? What I think is that in a physiological sense of why we would be going through this, and what are the benefits to our species to have a huge portion of the population not able to bear children. So most people think that people's reproductive systems are just the whole point of our species is to procreate, right? And that's such a shallow view, but when we're looking at it from the physical sense and looking at it through the history of time, what would be the benefit? And in this book, she said that there's been some evidence that women, she mentioned women, but we'll say people who reach the age of no longer menstruating, no longer bearing children, no longer have children of very young ages to care for. Although in our communities we know that children are cared for, everyone by all ages, but it means that a person's life is then opened up to be able to do a lot more. And in I guess in all human species historically, people were able to, women or people who menstruate, who stop menstruating, were responsible for providing most of the food to the community because we have more time to harvest, we have knowledge, we have all these things. So if you think about the kinds of things that we would do to provide food to the community historically, including harvesting, preparing food for the winter, all the or other seasons, all those things. And then I think then I that made me think about women in my own life that I know who are older and how much work they do, and just thinking about how often they're out there doing that kind of work, whether it's gardening and preserving food, or whether it's preparing food, whether it's gathering medicines and all that kind of things. Those people that do that work, um, provide they do volumes of it, volumes and volumes. And I think sometimes I would look at them and go, how on earth are they managing all of that? And now I'm starting to understand. I'm starting to get that with a little bit more time, if you're not like crazily working, millions of projects like I am, but with a million more, with a little bit more time on your hands, you're able to provide for community, um, you know, theoretically, in a lot bigger role than you would when you have little children, that you have to care for. So I just thought that that was an interesting sort of thing that she had written, and I'd like to sort of explore that a little bit, with maybe one of our guests in the future, and just kind of see if that holds true or not for us. It's right now it's just it's a theory, so let's see if it holds true, and in what ways does it hold true, because we often hear people talk about the roles of women or the roles of grandmothers, and we use that term loosely because we know that we don't have to actually birth children or grandchildren to be a grandmother. So but the idea that a person moves into the role in this life stage, we're going to have Kim Anderson on, who wrote the life stages of Indigenous women, a book on that, and she's done a lot of work around Indigenous women and her research. So we're going to have her on to talk about that, and how does that all fit in to where we go from here. What do we do to prepare ourselves to reach even an older stage, like Maria had alluded to? She said, well, you have your stage that you're in now into an elder stage, but then there's even one more. She said that she feels like she's reached now, which is even, which I never even thought of. I just thought from 60 to whatever, you're in the elder stage, but she's identifying that there's even one more that we go through, and that's must really prepare us to go on to the other side, to meet our ancestors.
I was thinking about how I love talking to Maria because she always says, "You young people," when she's talking about you and me to us. I'm like, yeah, I guess so. I mean, certainly don't feel it. And then that's, part of the conversation too. And I also think about my mom when you're talking about these life stages, and there's even more. I think about how my mom says, being a chop on is like way more than being a cook on, like emotionally and spiritually and everything. And I can't help but wonder if that sort of corresponds somewhat with those life stages, because chop on in Cree is like great grandparent or great grandchild. You call each other that. So she always talks about this depth of feeling towards chop-ons that she's experiencing differently than she did with grandchildren or even children. So it's like as the generations or the levels in your life stage go on, you come alive to many different possibilities within yourself, I suppose, of what you're capable of. And I think that's something to really look forward to. I also think of it like the sun rising, you see it coming over the horizon, and then certain times of the day, it makes you feel certain kinds of ways. And I think that's how I like to think about life stages as that. And it just feels a lot more positive. And I think that's also an important part of the discussions that we want to have, is to make menopause and perimenopause and postmenopause um, something as beautiful as possible, that we're not suffering through and hating and being so feeling miserable about, because it's hard enough as it is to go through it, and to spend so much time underneath a cloud because you hate it, or all of these feelings, and that's part of the real struggle. How do you transform it mentally in your mind to think about it more as you're going through a ceremony, as opposed to, oh, these hot flashes are going to be the end of me, or the insomnia. Yes, that's all true and those feelings are valid, but how do we transform it so that we don't see them that way, so that we can coexist with our bodies as it's going through what it's going through? And that, I think I'm finally getting to that stage. It took me this long. Like I said, I've been in perimenopause for 4 years, and it's been some really intense symptoms or changes that I've been going through. And talking with Christy about it, the experience has really helped shift things. And I think that's what also I'm hoping that these discussions do for people, is create the space to start talking about it, because maybe that's all we need, is to be able to talk about it with each other and make it more normal, more open. I know for my daughters, I tell them, pay attention to what I'm going through, and if you have any questions, because this is what you might be facing in another 30 years or so. So um, let's start talking about it now. And I try as much as I can to share with them, this is what it's like, because you can't really take life for granted at the same time. And maybe I do have 50 more years, maybe I don't. So I want to make sure that as I'm going through it, that I'm talking about it with my children so that they can have an idea of what my daughters can expect, and also my son. The male perspective and awareness to menopause is also very important, because if you have sons or nephews or brothers, or husbands or partners, they need to know what you're going through, or they'll never experience it, of course, but if they're aware of things, and realize that some of the things are normal, and not to take things too personally, because I think the changes that we go through can have real impacts, on marriages, so, and relationships. So it's important to know, um, what is happening in your lives, and share it as much as you can.
Yeah, those are all really good points. Well, our Zoom has given us a notice that we have 10 minutes left. So I think what we'll do is just go over some of the planned episodes and ideas. Um, Going on what you were just talking about, it made me think about our upcoming episodes on April 19th and 20th with Dr. Janet Smiley, to talk about what I really want to hone in on is getting beyond the hot flashes. So talking about um, what really happens to the body when estrogen levels start to drop, and what that how that can manifest in the physical body, just as an awareness exercise to make sure that people know that it's a whole spectrum of things that people may or may not go through. The other thing that we wanted to talk about was racism within the healthcare system, and how that impacts people who are trying to access healthcare around menopause, even more than what the average population would feel. Another episode that we have, the next one we have coming up, I believe, is with oh, who are we? It's with Kim
It's
and Jules.
Doreen.
Is it
Oh,
Doreen?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so Jules
That
Stachin and Kim Anderson, and they'll be discussing what they've uncovered or became aware of during their projects. Jules is a filmmaker, as many people know, and Kim is a professor, author, thinker, writer. And then the next day is Doreen Day, who's an Anishinaabe midwife, and practices birthing, is bringing back birthing in lodges, in ceremonial lodges. And she's also an amazing singer and a knowledge keeper. And then Edna Manitowabi, who is recognized as a leader of the Medewan Lodge. And so that will be from an Anishinaabe perspective. What other ones do we have?
We also have Lana Whiskey Jack coming up in the first week of May, and she's going to talk about the community organizing. We are also confirming dates with Shakti to come and talk. We want to try to be as, like I say, inclusive as possible. So we are inviting Shakti from another Indigenous community to come and talk about menopause and perimenopause. We're also going to be talking to Kinney Starr, but we don't have a date confirmed yet because we want to get the perspective from someone who's experiencing early menopause due to an outside event, like an external event that happened to her that triggered a menopause to begin. Um, I think we're also planning to have Maria back on at one point with my mom also to continue those elder conversations. And we're also going to try to include, we're working on getting confirmation of other guests, elders from different language speaking areas to hear from their perspectives and trying to get as many sharing going as much as possible. So those are some things coming up. And as we have conversations with folks, something else will come up and we'll be like, oh yeah, hey, let's talk about environmental racism and how that impacts menopause and who can we talk to about that. So we have our Facebook page, which is where we'll do the majority of our communication. We also have a Twitter where we'll make announcements as well. And as Christy mentioned in the beginning, this is just sort of an ad hoc. We do it when we can, when we're able. So there's no like first week of the month kind of schedule. It's whenever we're able to and whenever our guests are available. And I really want to thank Nicole for her support in getting this started with the Zoom stuff. And also, all of the guests who volunteer and give their time to join the conversation with us. That's been really amazing.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, so we'll see you next time on, I guess our next one is April 4th and 5th.
Yep.
Is that right? No, 5th and 6th. I can't remember exactly, but you'll see the poster. Yeah. Okay, thanks, Tanya.
Okay, bye.
Bye.